Hi, my name is Ben Van Heining, and I'm a member of the Flora Rotary Club. Recently, we performed the Shadows of Elmwood Cemetery tour that many people got to see live. Because we want to share this with as many people as possible, we had a crew come out and record our skits after the fact. So today we're recording out here at Elmwood Cemetery for your pleasure and for your viewing. I played Jesse Taylor, a railroad worker back in the 1800s that was tragically killed in Carlisle, Illinois. We hope you enjoy what you see. We hope you have great memories of this year's tour, and we hope that for many years we will be able to remember the stories of the people that are buried here in this cemetery.
Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see is a story. This is the first story in a series of stories that make up what we like to call the Shadows of Elmwood. What you're about to see is a narration of a moment. A moment in time of one part of a man's life. Does this moment define a man, shape his future, or is it a moment to be forgotten? What you see is a man. A demented man. A demented man who runs amok in Flora. We have the witnesses here to tell their story of seeing this man step off a train in a town he thought he knew, but knows no longer. A Mr. A.C. Hutton, a very demented man.
Now, I encountered this strange man on the train when I was coming to Flora from St. Louis. He was acting, well, not normal. He appeared to be traveling alone. He seemed really confused, and he kept muttering to himself. Now, being a well-bred lady, I tried not to stare too much, but he was making that very difficult. The train pulled into the depot around midnight, and by the time we were all disembarked, I noticed he was behind me. I thought he had been following me until I realized that he was running around the station yelling that somebody had moved it. The depot was in the wrong spot.
I swear it was right here. Have you seen it? The depot. It used to be right here. Who could have moved something?
Then he started hollering about how somebody had set his house on fire.
Burn my whole house down, nowhere to go. They're trying to burn me. I can't. What is happening?
Not long after that, he headed off towards the west side of town. Along the way, he stopped to talk to all of the streetlights. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I do know that this man was demented.
Hey, please, do not burn me. I can't be burned. I gotta get out of here and find somewhere to hide.
Well, I was asleep, and then I heard something. Somebody was in my house. It was him, and he was completely crazy. He was all scared and confused. Well, I was terrified. I didn't know if he was there to kill me or else, well, maybe something worse. He kept talking about how somebody had moved the depot, and he kept saying that somebody tried to set him on fire. He was crazy. Well, then my children woke up, and they were terrified. So we go out on the front porch. Turns out he had been talking to the entire neighborhood. He had been going in and out of people's homes the entire night. Well, finally, the men from the train station showed up. They had been following this demented man since he got off the train. People were talking about the demented man running amok in Flora. Well, thank goodness the police came and he was finally arrested.
What am I? Am I in the Bastille now? Is money what you want? I have nothing to give you, but if you could just rob me anyways, if that's what you really want.
See, I told you he's completely off his rocker. Well, they said he came to his senses on Saturday. He had a conversation with the mayor. Turns out they were childhood friends. The demented man running amok in Flora was actually from Flora. They called his son who lived in Nebraska, and he came and took him back home. The best part of the story, the doctor's diagnosis, a bad case of indigestion. I'll tell you one thing, I won't be eating at the train station anytime soon.
Mr. Hutton, a man traveling back to his childhood home, but a home he no longer knew. Was it really indigestion, or was that enough to drive him over the edge? You could read about it in the paper. Demented man runs amok in Flora. Was it really indigestion, or was there something more? Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The beautiful building that you see behind us represents the home of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad operations, otherwise known as B&O. Now, when you think of railroad companies, you think of massive locomotives, cabooses, and the thousands and thousands and miles of track that carry people and goods from one place to another. But actually, the story we're about to tell you took place in 1956 and put the B&O Railroad on the track of a completely different business.
Let me introduce myself and begin telling you this unique story of how the B&O Railroad branched out into a little side business of designing and selling fabric. My name is Mrs. Emma Day, and I was married to Bernard Day, a veteran railroader from right here in this very town of Flora. So, how did this little side business begin with the B&O Railroad? Well, let me tell you, it all started with a very random request by a retired Union Army major named Joseph Pangborn. Now, Joseph had worked for the B&O Railroad since the 1890s, but what he was really known for was his collections. He collected B&O Railroad memorabilia, specifically rolling stock. He collected the actual train cars and engines, and his collection was known to be the largest in the United States and probably the most comprehensive in the entire world. But what he wanted to add to his collection was a quilt that featured the very trains that he collected. And he asked me to make the quilt. Oh my goodness, I didn't even know where to begin, but I knew that I needed to find fabric that had trains on it.
Yeah, you see, that's where I came in. My name is Virginia Tanner, and I was the editor of the B&O magazine. I was contacted by Mrs. Day here requesting pictures, various pictures from engines and locomotives and stock that we had used in the B&O operations. She explained to me that she was going to use these pictures in order to make a quilt. Well, that is if she could find a way to get the pictures onto fabric. So I obliged Mrs. Day by providing the pictures that she had requested, but it sparked another idea. You know, if these engines and rolling stock would look good on a quilt, might they also look good on a general fabric? You know, a fabric that would appeal to railroaders and enthusiasts? So I took my idea to the F. Schumacher Company in New York, and they shared in my vision and enthusiasm for the creation of such a fabric.
They sure did. So the Schumacher Company took Miss Tanner's idea and they just ran with it. They hired artists to begin sketching out the trains and locomotives that they wanted featured on the fabric. These artists took their sketches, formed them into a repeating pattern, which was then printed onto the fabric, and the Schumacher Company named the line of fabric simply B&O Trains. But what was really interesting about the fabric is that they wanted to feature famous trains, because at that time there were a lot of trains that were featured in TV productions and in the movies, and they wanted to use those trains. So they ended up using the famous Phineas Davis, the great John Hancock, and the General, which had appeared in Walt Disney's The Great Locomotive Chase. And this is an actual piece of the fabric here that has all of these trains on it. It was printed in antique colors and has a modern flair. It went quickly into production and sales.
Yeah. And as Mrs. Day indicated, it truly is a depiction of railroad history told on cloth. Once produced, the fabric became available in department stores and decorator stores all over the country. It was actually made into many things. It was used for dresses and skirts and fabric coverings and sports shirts and all various other ideas that people had for using this fabric. So once the fabric was made, and the railroad was seeing what it was being used for, they actually had yards and yards of this fabric made into curtains that they used in their very own luxury passenger cars.
Yeah. I never would have thought that a simple request for a quilt would have turned into such a lucrative undertaking for the B&O Railroad. But it certainly did. It turned into a great side business for them. You know, who would have thought that a request by an old Civil War major who loved train memorabilia, that it would have went this far? And who would have thought that little old Flora, Illinois would have played such an important part in the B&O Railroad's successful line of fabric sales?
Yeah, it really was a successful line. You know, and as a writer of railroad history and stories, I was actually proud to have been a part of this idea and this side business for the B&O Railroad, and thankful that Mrs. Day's request sparked the idea. But very thankful to the F. Schumacher Company for developing such a beautiful fabric and for sharing in the vision and making it happen.
Well, hey, I better get back to my quilting now. Thank you.
December 15th, 1907. The people of Florida were presented with a mystery. A mystery that began with a man getting shot in the head, and through some great police work, resulted in an arrest and a trial. The papers called it Murder Most Foul. Good evening, my name is Judge Richard Ray. I met most of you once before when I told you about how I met my wife over apple pie and how we lost our little girl back in 1905. But let's jump ahead a couple of years to 1907. I was the state's attorney for Clay County, Illinois, and I was the prosecutor in the case of the people of the state of Illinois versus J.B. Wilson for manslaughter. To better tell the story, let's call our first witness, Marshall Holliday. Please state your name and your profession.
My name is Marshall Holliday. I was a police officer in Flora. Well, now I am officially retired.
In your own words, can you tell us what happened December 15th, 1907?
Well, I was called down to the light plant early Sunday morning. Rolla Carter had come across an injured man on his way to work at the railway yards about 7 a.m. that morning. He was so shook up by what he found that it took him a while to tell the other men what he had come across. They called the Dr. Fairchild as soon as they figured out that that man was still alive.
Where was the victim found?
He was found about 30 feet east of the light plant, right in the middle of the street, and about 75 feet south of the main track of the B&O Southwest Railroad. Well, first they took him in the plant, where they found a bullet wound about 2 inches right behind his right ear. From there they took him on over to Doc's place, and Doc did everything he could to save that man, but that bullet went right through his brain. That man didn't stand a chance.
What else can you tell us about the crime? Were there any witnesses?
We talked to several people that night and found out that several of the men working in the light plant that night had heard a gunshot round about the time that the 12:30 train would have been at the platform.
Well, what about those railroad men that were on the platform? Did they hear or see anything?
They didn't see or hear a thing. And that platform was crowded that night too, but they didn't see anything.
Well, who was the deceased?
The deceased was a tramp by the name of James Zimmerla. He was from Ohio. We were able to identify him as by a letter that we found in his pocket from his brother. We were able to identify him as a tramp by the company he'd been keeping.
I object!
What are you objecting for? I mean, there's no reason to object. This isn't even a real trial. It's more like a mock trial.
Well, I object to that whole tramp comment. James was my friend and he was a good man.
Would you like to tell them your side of the story?
Well, yes, I would.
Take the stand then. Would you state your name and profession?
I plead the fifth on both accounts as I don't want to incriminate myself.
Again, this isn't even a real trial.
All right. Well, you can call me Hasselman. And I, too, like to ride the rails for the discounted price of free.
Did you know the deceased?
I sure did. He was my friend and my partner. We used to travel all over the country riding the rails, save a little bit of money. Well, we just happened to be passing through Flora here, and that's when the big bull here shot my partner down in cold blood.
Can you tell us precisely what happened that night?
Yes, I can. We was about ready to jump that 12:30 train, right, and get out of town. We heard somebody yell, "Halt!" So we ran. Well, we didn't want any trouble. Well, he takes a shot at us. Well, I just keep running. I just keep going. I get down the tracks quite a ways, and I stop and I wait for my partner to show up. And he never does show up. Well, I figure he got hurt. Well, I makes my way on over to Olney. And I get over there and I'm telling the people my story. And I'm telling them, if you get over to Flora, you watch out for the big bull. Well, they must have got over here and got all caught up in it and everything. Next thing you know, they rat me out. I find myself over at Bridgeport, and here comes the copper. He hunts me down, drags me back over here to Flora, makes me tell my testimony. Same story I just told you.
So were you in the area where Zimmerla was found?
No, that's just it. We was closer to the tracks than that. We was getting ready to jump on the train. Now he shot my partner, then he drug him off into the street like he didn't do it. Well, like I said, I stayed on down the line a little ways and got scared and bugged out of town. I told everybody coming to Flora, you go to Flora, you watch out for the big bull.
Can I have my turn?
You know, that's a good idea. Let's bring this mystery to a close. Let's call Wilson to the stand.
Big bull. Big bull.
Arrest him.
Just sit down.
Big bull. Listen, I just want everybody to know here in this courtroom that I had nothing to do with shooting anybody. I don't know where this guy come up with that. And I definitely don't like the name Big Bull because I tell you what, makes it sound like somebody's full of something and it ain't me.
But Hasselman pointed you out. I mean, we all went down to the yards that night to see where and how it happened. When they asked who did the shooting, Hasselman pointed right at you.
Yeah, and they arrested me right up. Took me down to the station, posted a $10,000 bond. I had to call my wife and ask her how we gonna pay for that.
But you did pay for it. You did get the money. How'd that happen?
Yeah, I found out how many good friends I got. My brother, my family put their farmland up, got me out of there. B&O sent a defense attorney on my behalf. You tried to get me for manslaughter. You said I shot a man and hit his body. I never did such a thing.
You did too, do it. I was there.
Dream on, Alice. Wonderland's right around the corner.
So you're still claiming your innocence, even after Hasselman pointed you out at the yards?
I am wholeheartedly proclaiming my innocence. Absolutely. I was accused of something I never did. Now, every once in a while, I'll get a little shovey, I'll get pushy, and I gotta deal with hard heads, like the storyteller over here. But I never shot a man. I was doing my job. I would never do that.
You know, all I was trying to do was protect the people of Clay County. I was just doing my job. I was just trying to find the truth in court that day.
Yeah, and you found it. You found it that I'm innocent, that I never shot anybody. I mean, we got the testimony of a tramp who said I shot Zimmerla just 3 or 4 feet away from a crowded platform full of witnesses, yet nobody saw a thing, nobody heard anything. And to this day, no one else has come forward to say that. So about a month later, in September, the judge finally threw my case out. My personal hell was over, and I no longer had the charge of manslaughter hanging over my head.
So the mystery of the identity of the man who was shot has been solved. But we still don't know who did the killing. Who do you think was the killer? Murder, most foul. Court dismissed.
You know, folks, it's a good thing I never let the fact that I was a woman, and a very petite woman at that, stop me from accomplishing big things. Before I continue my story, I should probably introduce myself. I am Regina Joanne Perkowski Buckley. I was born on November 20th, 1912 in Chicago, Illinois, to Polish parents, Agnes and Lucien Perkowski. I attended grammar school all the way up until I was 13, and then I had to go take a job in the sewing factory. It was the height of the Great Depression, and all effort was needed. But let me let you in on a little secret. I actually knew nothing about sewing. But lucky for me, I'm a very quick learner, so I learned very quickly the art of managing a business and how to be an excellent seamstress. It was in that very factory where I met my future husband, Albert Buckley. We married shortly thereafter, and we started our own garment sewing business. We called it Four Sisters Sewing Manufacturing Company. And you might be wondering, where does the name Four Sisters come from? Well, I'm glad you asked. Albert and I, at the time we named the factory, had 4 daughters. And we didn't know it then, but a little later down the line, we would be blessed with daughter number 5. And we talked about changing it to 5 Sisters Sewing Manufacturing, but ultimately we felt that 4 Sisters had a unique ring to it. Albert and I were both very happy with both our personal and professional accomplishments, and we always felt like it was part of our duty to give back to the community through civic duty and generous donations to local businesses. But sadly, in 1946, when I was only 34, Albert unexpectedly passed away. He was only 7 years older than me. He left me all alone with 5 children and to run a business by myself. And as a young female business owner, I was met with a lot of resistance. But ultimately, I would like to think that my strong work ethic and mutual respect for everyone around me is what made me stand so tall in the business world, despite my petite stature. I was a lifelong member of the St. Stephen's Catholic Church. I was involved with the St. Anne's Altar Society and the Illinois Youth Commission. In the early 1950s, I helped start up the All-American Boy and Girl Contest, and I was an MC of that for over 30 years. I also helped start up the Flora Bank and Trust, and I served as a founding board member there until I turned 98. I always felt like I had 2 families, my family at home and my factory family. And until I was physically unable to do so, me and my factory family would meet for a breakfast once a month. I hope that their willingness to meet is a testament to show how well loved I was by everyone. I was always known to be dressed to the nines no matter where I was at and to treat everyone around me with a lot of kindness. I continued to manage 4 Sisters until I finally sold out at the age of 70, but I didn't stop there. I continued to manage Kern Manufacturing until I turned 80. I never did remarry, but I was just really involved with everything in the community and just always running around town. I survived by my 5 daughters, my 10 grandchildren, and my 11 great-grandchildren. I passed away just a few months short of my 100th birthday in August of 2012. And although I never did remarry, I really did live a happy life. My life is truly a testimony that small people can accomplish big things.
How many people leave for work in the morning and never return home at night? Sadly, the most painful goodbyes are the ones that are never spoken, the ones that are never truly explained. Not everyone dies of an extended illness the way that I did, with time to say goodbye to family and friends. My name is Julia Ann Holstein Taylor. This is my husband, Jesse Mayfield Taylor, and my son, Earl Taylor. Tonight, you will hear of 2 sudden and tragic deaths that shook the town of Flora only decades apart.
I was born in 1856 when the town of Flora was just 2 years old. The population then was 100 people. Then in 1876, Julia and we got married and we moved into our home on 5th Street. You may know the Youngs, they live there now.
We had 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls, with our youngest being Earl.
During the 1870s, Flora was one of the leading cities in southern Illinois. It was the crossroads of 2 major transcontinental highways, the good old B&O, the cross of the Baltimore and Ohio.
People would come and visit our town all of the time, saying that Flora was so friendly and such a beautiful place to be. At that time, my husband was an inspector of the railroad bridges.
It was a Tuesday morning in April in 1912. I left home and I went to work. I was working with my boss, Harry Byer, who was superintendent of bridges then. We had just finished inspecting a bridge in Huey, Illinois, Then we caught a motor car to Carlisle, hoping to catch a train back to Flora.
The fast westbound number 11 passenger train sounded its whistle loudly, so no one really understands how neither of the men heard or saw the train until it was just too late.
Sadly, neither of the men would reach their final destination, home. As the men were entering into Carlisle near the switch, they were hit and killed by the fastbound train. I just don't understand it. What were two experienced railroad men doing running on number 11's time? Was there a defect in their motor car that caused them to be delayed? Maybe they just lost track of time.
See, Harry and I knew every time of every train on the tracks back then, and the number 11 train was even a little bit behind.
I was just 27 at the time. My family and the town of Flora were all devastated. The newspaper article read, "Demise causes distinct shock."
And I wasn't the last of the Taylor men to meet an unfortunate end.
Our son Earl, he became a very successful businessman in the town of Flora. He opened his first grocery store at just the age of 20 years old. People from all over the community would come to visit his store and have to buy products like fresh meat and fruits and vegetables.
It was the eve of Halloween, and my day had started out just like normal. I was headed into work, and I got to see everyone setting up for the annual Halloween parade. And when I got there, I noticed that everyone's storefront windows were decorated in fall gear. So I decided I also needed to decorate.
His destination was Charlie Brown Park. He said that he would be back by no later than noon.
When I got there, I parked at a slope on the west side of the lake. And you see, there were so many beautiful leaves to choose from that I was able to fill the back of my car up. But when I was going to get back in the car,
the weight of his body caused the car to roll down the hill and into the water's depths.
I tried everything. I tried to open the door. I tried to roll down the window, but for some reason, nothing was working, and I was pinned in the car. That is where I took my last breath.
There was a town-wide search for him when he didn't make it back to town. The groundskeeper at Charlie Brown Park said he saw an oil slick out on the water, and so he took a paddle boat out to that spot and began feeling around with his oars. And unfortunately, that is when he found Earl's car.
The tow truck came to the lake to pull the car from the depths of the water. As the car slowly surfaced, it is said that the people around the lake saw my son in the car. He was trapped. He was dead.
I was just 55, leaving behind a widow and a child.
Death by drowning was the coroner's jury's findings.
Both of these men were killed so tragically and so suddenly. It's important that we remember every day as a gift and that we need to cherish the moments that we have and value the days that we have.
Good evening. I would like to share with you something that's very near and dear to my heart, serving in the Union Army. But before I get too far ahead of myself, I should introduce myself, tell you about my upbringing. My name is Austin Stanford. For any historians here, I was known as Austin W. Stanford, captain of the 98th Infantry for Illinois. I was born in 1841 in Tippecanoe County, Indiana, which is pretty close to the Indiana-Illinois state line. We was named after a famous battle that occurred there in 1811. So you can say I was born into a military environment. I was born the oldest of 12 children to David and Rebecca Stanford. I bet you Stanford sounds like a familiar name. I hear that your high school used to be called the Harder Stanford Township High School, and that the junior high sits on Stanford Road. And at this very time, the mayor of this town shares the same last name as me. So it makes me kind of feel like a celebrity. My family moved here while I was a young child. My father was a school teacher and a United Methodist preacher. In 1861, the Civil War broke out. And also in 1861, I was 20 years old. I had been a couple terms of school, and I had been dating a young lady that I so much wanted to marry. So in 1861, I gave her an ultimatum that we are going to get married or I'm joining the Army. Well, I joined the Army as a single man, so you can see how that turned out for me. At the time of my enlistment, there was no commissioned officers to be in charge of the training academy, so I was immediately made a corporal. After a year, I was honorably discharged, and I re-enlisted and was made first lieutenant. After a year and a half, I was made captain of the 98th Illinois Infantry. The 98th Illinois Infantry done most of their fighting at the Battle of Chickamauga, which was known as the second costliest battle in the Civil War, second only to Gettysburg. But my most honorable feat came in April of 1865 when I was in Washington, D.C., when John Wilkes Booth assassinated our president, Abraham Lincoln, on April 14th. But only 5 days prior, Robert E. Lee had surrendered his troops, ending the Great Civil War. Since I was a commissioned officer from the state of Illinois, I was chosen to be an honor guard and escort the president's body back to Illinois. In 1861, it was a trip of great appreciation, but in 1865 was a trip of sorrow and sadness. Only one family member of Abraham Lincoln's traveled with him both ways. That was his son, Willie. Willie passed away in 1862 at the age of 12, and they disinterred his body to return him home with his dad. It was a sad day to see that small little coffin set next to his father's larger one, but they are entombed together today in Springfield, and I myself am entombed in Clay City. I would like to thank you for listening to my story.
I can say with certainty that many of you on this tour have had a meal or two at the renowned Julian's restaurant here in Flora. But have you ever wondered how it got its name? I can start the story off with giving you a little hint of my name. Julian Kratzner, born on October 30th, 1916 to Dan and Henrietta Kramer Kratzner in Centralia, Illinois. I met Mildred Layton in my hometown and we were married in November of 1935.
My dear husband Julian worked at the Hollywood Candy Factory before becoming the head meat cutter, Kroger. We had 2 children, son Rollins and daughter Donna, and we were a few months short of our 9-year anniversary when Julian here was drafted into the service and reported to the U.S. Army camp in Sheridan, Illinois in April of 1944. There, he did several weeks of basic and specialty training until he left the U.S. for Scotland in September of 1944.
After arriving in Scotland, I was immediately thrown into battle and was wounded in action in October of 1944. I spent some time in the hospital, but before returning to duty before the Battle of the Bulge in December of the same year. On that very date, I was captured by German soldiers and marched hundreds of miles to a German imprisonment camp. I stayed there until the U.S. soldiers liberated the camp in April of 1945. I returned to the U.S. a month later. I spent some time at different military bases before serving an honorable discharge as corporal in October of 1945. Just a few days short of my 29th birthday.
I'm very proud of my husband's service to our country, and something he's too humble to tell you himself is that he was awarded with the Purple Heart Medal, Prisoner of War Medal, 2 Bronze Battle Stars, World War II Victory Medal, and many others. After Julian's discharge from the service, he returned home to Centralia where he did various jobs until 1960 when we moved to Flora, Illinois and opened Reben's Restaurant.
Our original location is where ACT Automotive is today. We of course changed the name from Reben's to Julian's and is now located in our current West Y location ever since 1967. Mildred and I had our ups and downs with the restaurant, but over the many years we met thousands of people, some we call close friends and loyal customers. The success of Julian's had even sent our 2 children through college.
Julian and I owned Julian's until 1975 when we sold it to Joe and Sue Martin of Flora. After retirement, Julian spent much deserved time on the golf course and pursuing his love of genealogy.
Mildred and I had a happy retirement until our passing in 1998. Our son Roland had been living in Vincennes, Indiana, and due to my age and my health, I decided to move in with him and his wife Judy. I moved to the Gentle Care Nursing Home in 2010 and passed away at the age of 93.
As for Julian's, it obviously still exists and going strong. The Martins owned Julian's for 15 years until it was sold to Carrie Scott and her grandson Tyler in the year 1990. Carrie was not only part owner of Julian's but also an excellent baker, and the restaurant's reputation that it upholds today definitely has her to thank, considering the wonderful pie selection that she provided daily.
Julian's changed ownership again, but still stayed in family business with Ryan's and brother sister-in-law, Ryan and Angie Scott. Grandma Carrie Scott continued making pies until her health prevented her from doing so. So if you didn't know before, you know now how Julian's became Julian's and how our legacy has lived on.
Sisters, sisters, there were never such devoted sisters. Never had to have a chaperone, no sir. I'm here to keep my eye on her. Caring, sharing, every little thing that we are wearing. When
I'm sorry, just a moment. I don't want these people to get the wrong idea.
Wrong idea about what, Jerry? What is that about?
Minnie, you know that I love you with my whole heart. But we did not share our clothes.
Okay, but don't call me Minnie. I hate that name. I prefer to be called Jerry, and you know it.
Jerry's my name. You stole it.
I borrowed it. I needed a good stage name. I loathe Minnie, and Marie just didn't quite fit for a performer like me. And it was your nickname, by the way. You go by Geraldine.
But Marie is beautiful.
But I made Jerry quite famous. Actually, let me tell you how. I have some of my favorite reviews right here. Her 2 performances are high spots. She steps on the stage and wows the audience with a series of encores in which they get more than their money's worth. What she doesn't know about terpsichore is not worth mentioning. Jerry is the girl who gets applause before she steps on the stage. They call me a show saver, the it girl.
As I recall, it was the it girl of burlesque.
Still an it girl.
I just happen to have brought an article with me as well.
Great.
Let me read mine here. Jerry McCauley has the pretty face of a doll, the plumpness which is now accounted much more stylish than the boyish form. She has a satisfactory voice and a great deal of daring. When she works up steam and cuts loose, nothing can stop her. She does nothing by halves, and since she is supposed to agitate her torso, vibrate her anatomy, shiver and shake, she sees to it that no part of her is left motionless. She shimmies as if her life depended on it.
That's even better than mine. That's a way more descriptive review.
But it is not the whole of who you are. You see, Minnie is my half-sister, born Marie Cockerell. We were both born in Sailor Springs, she in 1905, and I
Whoa! Why do we have to tell them about our age?
Minnie, it doesn't matter. We're dead.
Oh, right. Go ahead.
As I was saying, I was born in 1917 as Geraldine Hunt. I remember when I was 6, I actually was at Minnie's house, and her husband, who she married at the age of 16, was having a terrible fight. I had to run and get help, and shortly after that, my sister had to leave town.
Word of advice, do not marry a professional gambler at the age of 16. It is not going to go well. My family helped me leave, and I went to St. Louis, and I got a job as a showgirl, and then an assistant to some magicians, and later I moved to Chicago, where I started a career in burlesque.
I actually got to visit her in Chicago once. Her manager told me I was better off to try to get a job at the Piggly Wiggly down the street. I never did figure out if that was a jab at show business or at me.
Definitely show business. You have always been beautiful.
Thanks.
I had a great career. I had built up quite a name for myself as Jerry McCauley. I became a headliner, And I even got to work with Lou Costello from Abbott and Costello and Legs and Laughter in 1931. I'll let you decide who is the legs and who is the laughter.
She also got arrested. And at the time, our family was mortified. But it did make for some great stories that we were able to tell and share later on.
Okay, it was 1929. I was on a stage doing my regular dance in a robe, kind of like this one. Well, I left the stage and I came back with a little less on and I danced some more. Well, I left again and I came back with a little less on and I danced some more. You get the picture. Anyway, there happened to be a police officer in the audience and he proclaims that my act was indecent and obscene. I ended up in court. The police officer produces one of my costumes. Don't know how that happened. My attorney is arguing that my performance was art and an athletic performance and distinctly not indecent. I had to perform this thing in front of the judge in the courtroom. Needless to say, he deemed it athletic and no charges were pressed.
I'm sure he did. Your act was definitely athletic with your agitating of your torso and vibrating your anatomy. Whew, she sure did live a colorful life compared to mine. I stayed here in Clay County and I married Orville Stanley when I was 16. We had a wonderful life and was married for 27 years until his death in 1960.
I was not so lucky in love, including that gambler I told you about earlier. I was married 5 times, but once to professional wrestler Ray Steele. My sister, she stayed here, like she said. She had 9 kids, 32 grandchildren, 76 great-grandchildren, and 36 great-great-grandchildren before she died. And she was the best, most devoted, loving mom and grandma I've ever known in my life.
It is so sweet of you to say. And that is what I want you to remember about my sister. Not her fame as Jerry. You see, Minnie could never have kids of her own. So when she got a little bit older and retired from the stage, she actually helped women find homes for children that they couldn't take care of. She would ride the train from northern Illinois down to southern Illinois and deliver kids to their adopted families. She even took one to Indiana to our sister and brought one right here to Clay County. That is what I want you to remember about my sister, her heart.
I would have done much more of that if I could have, but I passed away in 1967 at the age of 62. I wanted to be buried near my mother, but my stepson had me buried up north.
I died at the age of 93 and I'm buried here in Elmwood Cemetery with my darling husband.
And so, for our encore, sisters, sisters, there were never such devoted sisters.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jay Valbert, and tonight my family and I would like to tell you about Flora's oldest business, Valbert's Feed Store.
Jay, honey, are you bragging about the store again?
No, I'm just simply trying to tell these folks how we started the oldest business here in town.
Well, did you tell them that you were a big shot businessman? Wearing around your fancy suits, driving around those big flashy cars all around town?
No, I didn't, but you accused me of bragging and listened to you. Now hush, so I can tell them about
your grandfather, Francis. He was born in France and he came here. He had a son named Franklin after Benjamin Franklin, and he named his daughter America after our beloved country. How patriotic.
Can I talk about the feed store now?
Go ahead.
All right, you see, I built the first store back in 1911.
Did you tell them about the time the first building collapsed in 1913?
I'm getting to that.
Well, you see, in 1913...
I said I'm getting to that. In 1913, I was in the process of building our second store, because our first store, which I built back in 1911, we had quickly outgrown. Now, the first store was built on South Foster Street here in town. And the second store was going to be with another business owner by the name of Mr. Myers in one building, and we shared a wall. One night something happened, that wall came down, which brought the rest of the building down, and both businesses were ruined. It was a huge mess, and that was the first disaster for Valbert's Feed Store.
Luckily, nobody was hurt.
Luckily, thankfully. But we rebuilt, and in no time the new store was completely stocked. While we carried things such as lumber, dried goods, fabrics, a little bit of anything and everything. Now, a minute ago I said our first store was located on South Foster Street. You may be wondering where that's at. Well, the road's still here, but it was renamed after me, J. Valbert Street.
And then it got changed.
It got shortened to just Valbert Street after us, because someone probably complained. But the homes that are there are still built under the J. Valbert addition.
Well, our store had about everything, but we were known best for its baking goods. We had the best grade of flour, and all the ladies wanted our brand.
And the men came because we had the best horse and chicken feed around. Now back then we did a lot of trading. The men could bring their corn and flour and trade for wheat and feed. We did a lot of trading. We traded for anything and everything back then, and it was just a win-win for both sides.
Now, will you two quit chatting and come eat?
Yeah, Mom and Dad. Hazel has their famous chicken and dumplings, and they're ready.
This is my son, Flota. When I retired, he took over the store, and this is his wife, Hazel, and she does make the best dumplings around.
I had to rebuild the store after the second disaster when it caught fire and burnt down. So in 1936, I built the new store, right where it's presently located. I always liked the idea of a drive-through store, so that's what we did. We made it to where you can just drive through, pick up your feed, groceries and such.
Yeah, back then we sold just about everything. Of course we had the feed, but we also had flour, sugar, and eggs. We had so many eggs. We would deliver them all over town, and even the nursing homes would order dozens at a time.
Eventually we figured out that we could have a heck of a business just by selling the finest feed around. So we phased out the groceries and such and went just strictly feed store.
And that store sure kept you busy. At least you found some time to farm, right, Flota?
Yep. I farmed mostly red top hay, a little bit of corn. Our farm was located just south down here on Blue Mountain Road.
And we had all those cows, and of course the chickens.
Yep, can't forget about those cows and chickens. But what I really love to do is goose hunting and fishing. I love my trips out to Lake Grindell. One time I caught a monster out there. He had to have been this big. I just might go out there and try my luck later tonight.
Not until you come eat some of these dumplings.
They sure smell good. Trust me, they're pretty good.
Well, I'm just glad the business was able to stay in the family. We really made a lot of good memories here in Flora, and we really enjoyed serving the people in this town.
I am too, Dad. I really am.
I passed away in 1948 at the age of 83.
I passed away in 1962 at the age of 68. I retired in 1942. My son Francis took over the store. He ran the store until 1986 when he passed away at the age of 71. His son Steve owns the store to this day.
It's hard to believe that Valbert's has been around since 1911.
Are you guys done chatting about yourselves? Hazel's dumplings are ready and I'm hungry.
We fought together as brothers in arms.
And we died together. Now we sleep side by side. We are three of the over 407,000 U.S. soldiers that were killed in action fighting for our country in World War II.
I'm Lusko Wickizer, and I was a private in the U.S. Army. I arrived in England in 1944 and was sent to Germany soon after. I fought during one of the bloodiest, most deadly battles in U.S. history, the Battle of the Bulge.
During this battle, U.S. and Allied forces created the appearance of a large bulge. Soldiers were told to keep the line and not let any enemy through. This was Hitler's last chance to overtake his enemies and grow his empire. The battle lasted 6 long, miserable weeks during one of the coldest winters ever recorded. Along with freezing rain, thick fog, and deep snowdrifts, it made for impossible fighting conditions. However, the U.S. was able to crush Hitler and defeat his hopes of world domination.
The fighting began on Christmas Day in 1944. The sun finally came out that morning. But after one day of fighting, I lost my life when Germany slammed our Allied line near Belgium. I was only 30 years old.
Freedom isn't free, but we were all willing to lay everything down on the line for our country, family, and friends. Hitler failed to push his way through the Allied line, crushing his hopes of world domination.
Winston Churchill said that the Battle of the Bulge broke the backs of the Nazi war machine.
I'm Roscoe Lamb. My name was in the Clay County draft in 1943. I entered the war front in Germany about 2 months after Wickheiser paid the ultimate sacrifice. I was 28, and after 2 days of combat, I too died in Germany. I'm Everett Kerr, and I joined the war in the summer of 1944, and I died in Germany at the age of 23. I lasted almost 6 months of fighting before falling.
Although we all died in 1944 and 45, our bodies were not returned back to the United States until 3 years later.
We traveled on the ship Joseph V. Connolly. We were greeted by a crowded and flower-strewn New York harbor. Aboard our ship of over 6,000 bodies, 22 were taken by train to downstate Illinois. These two men are buried right here in Elmwood, and I'm buried at Golden Cemetery in Flora.
Being the first of the dead to arrive in Flora following World War II, my arrival was a huge deal. My casket was draped with a flag when my body arrived at the B&O depot. The large crowd gathered became silent, paying their respects. There was a procession through the downtown with my widow, children, parents, siblings, and so many others.
All stores and businesses were to be closed, and all flags half-mast. Our bodies were kept under military guard at the funeral homes until we met our final resting places. Now, you may be wondering why it took our bodies 3 long years to return to the U.S. Well, the U.S. had very different procedures back then than it does today.
During World War II, the dead were buried temporarily in overseas cemeteries close to the battlefield. Bodies were identified by our dog tags, our graves were marked with a small cross, and our fellow soldiers buried us.
Graves were often isolated from those battlefields or in small clusters due to combat conditions. Most of the time, soldiers were buried on the spot in shallow, unprepared graves. Some soldiers to this day have still not been identified. Today, a soldier's body is shipped to the U.S. directly after death with a 100% chance of identification. However, back then, the U.S. ordered that no soldiers were to be shipped home during the fighting. All of the U.S.'s ships were being utilized in the war effort, and, in the end, the most important thing was getting the surviving soldiers back home.
It took over a year just to get all the surviving troops back to the U.S. Can you imagine waiting that long to see your loved ones after a war had ended?
Eventually, all of our bodies were located, dug up, and formally identified. We were then prepared for our permanent burials. Our families had the choice of burying us in France or having us shipped back home to be buried. The process of pulling families took a very long time, and on top of that, casket manufacturing was at a standstill due to steel and coal strikes.
There were also other problems that slowed our arrival. The European nations were war-ravaged and tensions were high. The transportation options were little to nothing.
Some soldiers would die of disease, which meant local health regulations had to be followed before their bodies could be removed. Finally, 3 long years after the war had ended, we were finally back on American soil.
The land of the free.
And the home of the brave.